Sabrina 2000s comic issue 32. We start out with Harvey telling Chloe and Sabrina that he'll see them tomorrow for the big day, where he'll want to spend the whole day with her. I'm guessing this is a hope spot and Sabrina will be let down, because it looks like the story is being nice to her, and apparently the tone is too dark for that. I bet that once again her aunts will ruin everything for her, especially since apparently Hilda doesn't know what they're talking about. Sabrina says they're just excited for the class trip tomorrow, and she hopes they're gonna put on their seatbelts. Hilda has to brake in a hurry because Jem's limo cuts them off, and she says cathartically, "I don't know how you two can stand that spoiled rich brat." Her limo driver apologizes for almost being late. The girls are excited about going to an amusement park. I guess they won't get to go, right? Or something will go wrong there since it's being built up to. Salem's staring at the stock report, but I don't know why because he's not allowed to have stocks. I guess he's just that bored. He says that Funland was recently acquired by Jem's father so that she can control the class trip to the park. Wait, is it realistic for a school to have a class trip to an amusement park? I never heard of that. How is that educational? Why was it too simple for it to just be a trip Sabrina, Chloe, and Harvey were gonna take on their own? I find it cathartic that even the ants are mad at Jem. Salem wants to tag along invisibly and protect Sabrina if Jem misbehaves. Fortunately, Hilda says that she likes the way he thinks because it's the way she thinks, all of a sudden. It seems like we've got good Hilda and Zelda in this particular story. Because I was expecting her to tell Salem no because he wanted to use magic. The next day, we see Sabrina arrive at the amusement park in a bus while Jem showed up in the limo, and she tells them all with a megaphone that as of 9 o'clock this morning, she's the one running the amusement park. Realistically, she wouldn't be allowed to, rich or not, because she's only a teenager, her parents don't even like her, and she'd have a lot of hard work and be way over her head in having to run an amusement park by herself. Though it wouldn't be so bad if that was explained to be why her parents gave her the park, and she quit because of the paperwork. I thought someone else would run the park. She tells them all that they'll need one of her passes to get in. I guess she's forcing them to pay for it. Her principal objects to her, and she tells him to talk to her lawyers. I wish she got expelled. Would a teenager even be able to have her own lawyers, let alone a neglected and hated teenager? There are entire private schools where rich kids attend, and I highly doubt they never get disciplined in them just because they're rich. His objecting to her doesn't get to be satisfying because he's interrupted. And that's somehow the end of it, despite him being an authority figure over her. Salem says behind a bush that this may be unethical, but it's not outrageous. Even by his petty standards, apparently. Is it realistic that these three can't hear him talking? He's only a few feet away from them. Literally. It sure is an unfortunate coincidence that Sabrina and Chloe of all people are last in line. It's so predictable that she's fresh out of passes. Surprisingly, she tells them to relax and says that Watkins will drive them to the office for their passes while she looks serious about it. The obvious twist would be that they aren't getting any passes. She taunts them that she'll keep Harvey company, and Chloe's the voice of reason, telling Sabrina to get into the limo and get their passes while they have the chance. Salem's torn between the urge to teach Jem a lesson and his duty to follow Sabrina. His duty was to protect Sabrina from Jem if Jem misbehaves, not to protect Sabrina from Watkins, and Sabrina's a witch! She should be able to handle herself, and the insinuation that she can't is insulting at this point in the franchise. Salem casts a spell to have a bird give Jem a message, as in drop shit on her. I'd rather the bird peck at her and we actually see it. While I don't like seeing gross stuff, even Archie Sonic had the guts to show Vector getting some white stuff from a bird fall on his head, and that was a kid's comic too, supposedly. It's so predictable that the limo driver isn't taking them to get passes and is instead driving them out of the park. I have to ignore my hunch that he's gonna kill them, or is at least hired to injure them, because it's a kid's comic. I just daydreamed about that because I was so bored. Jem did mean the office, but it happens to be 45 minutes away. Watkins shuts Sabrina's mic off, naturally to avoid getting insulted. Why doesn't he quit and get a job where he'll have dignity? He doesn't actually have to do what Jem says. I never even saw why he was a recurring character. It would make sense if there was a high turnover rate among our limo drivers. Salem reveals that he's in the limo too and appears in front of them, startling Chloe of course. Chloe says that being Sabrina's friend is never dull, And somehow the editor thinks he needs to remind us she knows Sabrina's a witch, as if we're idiots. Salem surprisingly warps them to a roller coaster that's in the middle of working, and that includes Watkins just to freak him out. I'm glad he outright warped them all to the roller coaster instead of simply back to the park. Sabrina fortunately thanks Salem as he goes invisible again. And Harvey says that he didn't see Sabrina and Chloe in line to ride the mecha, as Gem's satisfyingly confused at this. Watkins is freaked out and wants to take a sick day. I guess Sabrina won't get in trouble for magic clearly being revealed because he'll be forced to forget it off screen and nobody will ever believe him. Everyone's probably assuming that he was nice enough to give them a ride on the roller coaster and is just acting here. Harvey asks Sabrina if she wants to hang out, and Chloe makes an excuse to leave because there's a crowd. Hopefully because she wants to be nice and leave the two alone together. And she goes on the Tunnel of Love ride with Harvey. I feel sorry for him. Salem's glad that she's growing up and being proactive. Okay, but imagine if Sabrina was the guy and Harvey was the girl, and the guy was forcing the girl into the Tunnel of Love when she had gasped and shuddered about it. Suddenly doesn't seem so sweet and innocent anymore, and it doesn't look like Harvey's being sincere when he says this is nice. Why does the animated series have to suddenly make Harvey such an immature kid that he's afraid of being in a relationship with Sabrina for no apparent reason? He's going to high school. I know it because there was a story where clearly Sabrina was 14 based on the candles on her cake. It's not funny, it's just a pointless change. He'll probably never explain what his problems are with Sabrina that make him not want to date her. So he's just being frustrating and confusing. And so is Sabrina because she keeps going after him when there's nothing remarkable about him compared to any other guy. Suddenly it turns out that Gem's replaced Sabrina. Sabrina's crying near the staff's emergency exit. I'm starting to remember reading the story before. She complains that Gem ordered the security guards to remove her from the ride in midstream. And of course she couldn't use magic to get out of this, except she has Salem to erase people's memories if she's too stupid to do it. She gives up and says that she's here to have fun, not play games with Gem. Or Harvey, because instead of being a man and standing up for her, he sat there like a deer in the headlights. He does tell Gem that that was so uncool, but that's really not good enough. Salem tells her to not be so hard on Harvey because he was just nervous. Gem tells Harvey they should abuse their power together and wants to cut them in front of the line for the haunted house. I don't know why anyone goes to these places. It's not like they're the roller coasters or even merry-go-rounds. Surprisingly, Harvey refuses and wants to find Sabrina to apologize. It's late for that, but to be fair, what was he supposed to do against security guards? Salem follows Gem as she cuts in line, and she forces someone to send her into the haunted house alone, and Salem uses magic so that she gets a tour of the other realm's needlessly scary and confusing outer space area, which has a giant floating eye and snake, and a toilet with eyes, and a door in it for no reason. Unless Gem's memory of this was erased, this would traumatize her. It's too bad this was only one measly panel and the rest of the page was filler, because I can't say this makes me feel better about her part in the story and makes it worth it. She doesn't even get slapstick. She calls her father and tells him to sell the amusement park, even if he does take a huge loss, and send over a placement for Watkins, who's still sick realistically. If he doesn't like her, why would he take a huge loss for her? Why does she like him enough to call him daddy if her parents hate her so much that they went on a vacation to Guam without her? You'd never guess this based on reading the comic. I only knew about that from reading the show's tropes page. I assume the writers of the comic never watched the actual show. Since Salem won't erase her memory of this because she won't sell the park then, I guess she wasn't made to forget that experience, because she wouldn't know exactly who's responsible, and it wouldn't prove which in particular exists, and nobody would ever believe her. In the next story, Salem ignores Sabrina's protest that she's too old for a bedtime story and reads her one anyways. That's this comic. I guess the reason she's kinda smiling anyways is that she still acknowledges that it's a sweet gesture of Salem when he doesn't have to. I don't find it believable that she was read Cinderella more than once. Salem says this is a new version he wrote himself. Then what took him so long? I thought he'd read her a totally new story. Already I'm disappointed because it's not as original as it could be and just ripping off Cinderella instead. This better be interesting enough. Salem says that once upon a time there was a girl who was very sad, partially because her name sucked, so already this is original. Originally, Cinderella's parents loved her, but in this, they hated her enough to give her a name she'd be bullied for, or at least didn't think about how she'd get treated. And Sabrina lived with her two aunts who were very mean to her. What's the difference? They're even smiling, just like they usually do. I was pessimistic enough to predict that they'd only tell Sabrina to do stuff that they already tell her to do in reality, and I was proven right. This isn't a good parody because the only thing they don't get called out on here for is telling her not to use magic. If he really wanted to portray them as wicked, he'd portray them as refusing to heal their broken leg or something. Instead, they made her do homework like every parent would, even the most lenient mother ever. Why is Salem portraying her as a normal girl who has no reason to be unhappy with her aunts? This is supposed to be Cinderella! I was looking forward to them being wicked as a nice parody. He's immediately squandering the potential by having her life be exactly the same. Cinderella had to clean the entire house and got cinders on her from the fireplace, which is where her new name came from. It's gonna be pretty condescending if the moral of the story will be that she should be fine with her aunts ordering her around all the time just for the sake of the kiddies in the audience. It turns out Sabrina's aunts aren't letting Sabrina attend a concert by her favorite band because it's on the space station, and they don't have a rocket ship. Except they're witches, so they would just be able to zap one up. And somehow Sabrina doesn't say this or zap one up herself. And also, Salem's a horrible writer here, because obviously her favorite band wouldn't do this. How would I expect anybody to have their own rocket ship to show up there? Suddenly, at the night of the concert, Salem shows up as her magical fairy godmother, as if she'd need him when she's a witch. Although them all being mortals in the story would explain the objection to that concert. I didn't notice a difference. Why would she call him Santa when he looks nothing like him? Salem really is insulting her intelligence. You'd think Sabrina would object to this. Sabrina then panics and hits him with a book, calling him an intruder and asking for the police, when the police would clearly not be able to hear her. Her having the courage to do this would make sense if she was already a witch anyways. This is trying to be realistic, and it makes me wish she had the courage to be like this with other supernatural intruders in her home in real life. Salem says that he's here to take her to the concert. She cheers, so I'm guessing things will go horribly wrong for her eventually. So how did Salem find out she needed help? Does the fairy godmother have mass surveillance throughout the planet? I guess she makes a habit out of staring into a crystal ball to see if anyone needs charity from her, and she chooses the first person she sees that night. Salem gives her new clothes, and apparently Sabrina's familiar with the plot of Cinderella already. As why else would she make this wild assumption about pumpkins and mice? Salem says that cats don't work well with mice, so we'll just zap them to the concert. Good, that's exactly what I was expecting, for once. Makes more sense. They get front row seats. I assume they replaced whoever was actually there. Wasn't anyone else in the seats around them? Were they all sent to their deaths just so Sabrina could be alone with Harvey? Wouldn't they freak out at them appearing? Harvey is the lead singer in the band. Harvey notices that Sabrina is the only one in the audience, and one of the bandmates says, "I knew we shouldn't have held this concert on a space station." It's so forced that they made that decision, but at least this means the writer in Salem knew it was stupid. I knew it was intentionally outlandish though. Sabrina wants to call her friend Chloe to tell her where she is. She expects her to believe her? I guess she's still a witch, but was too stupid to zap up a rocket ship. Salem forgot to mention until now for some reason that he has to get her home by 10 o'clock because tomorrow's a school day. And it's already 10, so he fortunately apologizes as she warps away, somehow leaving her cell phone behind even though she was holding it. This was better written in Cinderella where she tripped and lost her slipper. The phone rings, and I don't buy that Sabrina would think that Harvey would answer the ringing cell phone to Sabrina and not Chloe. Because obviously Sabrina was about to call Chloe. So the story was clearly leading up to Harvey talking to Chloe. Why else would it already be ringing? It's based on Cinderella. She would know that the cell phone was her slipper equivalent. Wait, what? It says Salem's on the other line instead of the person Sabrina was gonna call. Although to be fair, we didn't actually see Sabrina dialing Chloe's number. I assumed she did in between panels because it's a comic book, and Salem seemed to have no reason to be the one calling Sabrina's number with a different phone. How did he know her number already? They just met. Salem says that Harvey needs a manager, and apparently I'm not having one is why he had a concert on a space station. I guess Harvey and his bandmates were insanely rich. Lucky guess for Salem that he did in fact have no manager. Salem agrees to manage his band and becomes rich with the band and lives happily ever after. Sabrina says cathartically, "That was a terrible story." She asks what happened to Sabrinarella, and he says it doesn't matter even though he's reading the story to her. He wants the cat to be the hero of the fairy tale for a change. At least that's new. Cinderella's stepmother had a cat. At least the fairy godmother got a happy ending, but if he helped Sabrina just to be nice, there's no reason Sabrina wouldn't have gotten to date Harvey in that story too, with Salem's help. The story ends with Salem wanting to read her a tale ripping off Snow White, as I lament the missed opportunity of the plot. It could have had a story where her aunts actually acted like the evil stepmother and stepsister, and then got awesomely called out and punished for it, and that would have been epic. In the next story, Harvey asks Sabrina if she likes how he decorated his room with pictures and a cardboard cutout of a female tennis player. Sabrina gets jealous and says that the reason she hasn't seen him lately is that he's been spending all of his time with those pictures. He also says he's got her video game and music video and a DVD of her greatest tennis games. Why did he think she'd want to know this? She couldn't be more obvious about her crush on him. Surprisingly, instead of just continuing to be jealous and wanting to leave, Sabrina tells Harvey he should learn how to play tennis himself, probably because it'll occupy his time and get him to spend less time watching Hannah play. Then, instead of agreeing to do that, he asks Sabrina why she doesn't take lessons in tennis herself, hoping that she'll become a great tennis player and introduce him to Hannah. Sabrina sarcastically says that's very funny, so he was just being sarcastic. After all, why would he think she'd want to do that for him when she clearly wants to date him? She wants to become a great tennis player to get Harvey's attention herself. We cut to Chloe playing tennis with her, asking how long does she have to keep chasing her wild shots. Sabrina wants to keep at it until she's good enough at tennis that Harvey will be impressed with her, and Chloe says that could take months. Sabrina admits that she's a terrible player. If she's fine with using magic to become a better player, what took her so long? Chloe has a good point when she complains about her idea. Because she is right that almost every time Sabrina casts a spell on herself, it backfires. If Sabrina was smart, she'd listen to her. Instead, she casts a spell on her racket instead. She says it doesn't look any different, even though it has light around it. She does a perfect shot. When Chloe hits the ball too high, Sabrina's racket flies her into the sky to try to catch up with a tennis ball, and as it bounces, she gets forced to walk on some table while two men are playing chess in the park. At least she keeps apologizing to the people she's bothering, but how is the tennis ball bouncing that much to go that far ahead? She ends up going into the fountain and says that she should have let go of the racket. If she could have just done that, she would have done so a long time ago. I was thinking she should have removed the spell on it as soon as it went wrong and she landed. And Sabrina just figured out that his interest in sports stars has nothing to do with sports. Instead, like I guessed at the start, he's just interested because Hannah and them are pretty women. And apparently they're that much prettier than Sabrina, and he's already used to seeing her. The first story, by Mike Gallagher, is about Jem taking over the amusement park that Sabrina was conveniently getting to go on a class trip to. As apparently Jem's father is just letting his teenage daughter run a park like that. And she gets between Sabrina and Harvey, causing Salem to use magic to give her a scary tour of the other realm for a second when she tries to go into the haunted house, which caused her to give up on running the park because she never wants to think about it again. But considering how she was behaving in this story, like wasting everyone's time making them line up for her own passes, and trying to keep Sabrina from attending the park at all, Jem didn't suffer nearly enough for how she acted in this issue. That was just one panel. Sabrina should have cast a spell to stand up for herself. The second story, by Angelo, is a missed opportunity to show Sabrina's aunts acting in an exaggerated evil way to actually be like the wicked stepmother of Cinderella, so they can get punished. Instead, they act exactly the same, complete with arbitrarily refusing to let Sabrinarella go to a concert. Although, Salem's bedtime story to Sabrina didn't exactly specify whether Sabrinarella and her family were witches or not. If they aren't, that's the only way it makes sense that she wasn't allowed to go on a space concert and she needed to rely on a fairy godmother to go there. And the story ends with Salem becoming the manager for Harvey's band and getting rich when he doesn't care enough about Sabrina to tell her that Sabrinarella and Harvey started dating, even though he's reading the story to her. So how could he be that stupid? Why did he try to tell her another story he made? She clearly didn't want that. The final story is about Sabrina trying to be a great tennis player to get Harvey's attention. And when she casts a spell on a racket to make it force her to be a great player, she ends up being forced to fly and chase after a high ball. And it turns out Harvey's interest was only fleeting, so Sabrina has an excuse to give up practicing tennis. It's realistic that after all the sports she's played, we get to see one that she's terrible at. The spell backfiring on her had a consequence that was realistic, I suppose, because Sabrina didn't want that to happen to her.